Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description, in every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic, one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. One mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 5 of Peacock's Miss Davis, entitled A Great Place to Drink to Gain Control of Your Drink. I mean, these episode titles, man, I don't know what to make of them. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this one, and I can't quite make sense of it. The only drink that we see really, as far as I'm trying to recall off the top of my head, and even while I was doing these notes, is the drinking from the Holy Grail. But like, I don't understand the control of the drink. A great place, like I don't know. I can't make sense of it. But maybe you guys figured it out. Let me know what you think in the comments. I googled the title just to see if it was maybe like an excerpt from something. I couldn't find anything but reviews of this episode. So. Speaking of reviews of this episode, let's get started with talking about it. And man, I'm really enjoying this show, man. Like, I really am. Like, you know what I'm loving about this show? I love how as you go deeper down the rabbit hole, speaking of rabbit hole, this show should be called Rabbit Hole, not the one that's called Rabbit Hole. Well, although the one that's called Rabbit Hole is good, it's entertaining, and it is very much rabbit hole-ish, but this show is shitting on their rabbit hole. Their rabbit hole is shitting on rabbit hole's rabbit hole. But as you go deeper down the rabbit hole, more questions are raised and the future becomes murkier. And when I say the future, I mean future episodes. But we also backfill a lot of information that didn't make sense in previous episodes, or we connect the dots with previous episodes. And I also love how no matter how nonsensical this show may seem at times, like the end of episode 4, there always seems to be a logical explanation. Like, I couldn't even imagine how they could make the end of episode 4 make sense to me. But now here we are at the end of episode 5, and not only does episode 4 make sense, but we now have a new goofy mission heading into episode 6. And I like the fact that, they hit us with, that mystery at the end of episode 4 that was very much, what the fuck is this? And they spent the entire episode 5 telling us what the fuck was that? And I thought that was, I really appreciate that. I really do. And it was creatively done, creatively told, and there's a whole lot of cool shit that I think this episode did that I'm going to talk about. But, when we're talking about things making sense, the opening scene with Simone and Jay in this episode, when she goes to the restaurant and it's destroyed and he's beaten up in the back. On one hand, that scene is meant to further inform us of the nature of this restaurant, right? Like, essentially, anyone can come in there when they pray is what I'm gathering. And sometimes when people meet with Jesus or God or whatever you want to call him, or whatever deity you may be, like, who knows? Like, he might not even be Jesus to somebody who's not a Christian. Like, maybe like somebody else prays and they go see him and they go to this restaurant and he's not Jesus. He's whoever, I don't know, Buddha, whoever the fuck. I don't know. But whatever deity they may worship when they come in there. And they might have beef with that deity over pain they might have suffered. So, like, it kind of helps with the world building here. They also talk about how they can't talk about Jesus' other hoes, and I thought that was interesting. But like I said, world building, right? But what about that specific person who came in there to beat him up. Because if you think about it, in the last episode, we heard about how the Pope was like, yeah, I rolled up in there and Jesus was talking to some other woman and hushed me. And that sounded like kind of like a throwaway thing, but then we ended up finding out the circumstances surrounding that conversation. And it seemed small, but it ended up being massive, which I'm going to talk about in this video. But that thing about who beat him up, why they did it, it feels kind of small. They didn't even answer the question. They stopped short of explaining who was there and why. Jay downplays it, which lets me know that in one of these final episodes, probably the next one, given how this show reveals information, some story we see is going to connect to that moment, and we're going to understand who was there to beat him up and why. And I think that's a super cool aspect of this show. I'm not going to say with 100% certainty that's going to happen, but they're utilizing a lot of these same tactics, right? And it feels like this is the same thing that with the Pope. And I bet we're going to find out. I bet we're going to find out who was there and why. And I bet it's going to be important. And I bet it's going to connect to something or someone we already know. And I just love how they do that. And I love how I have no fucking idea who this person might be that we may have potentially already even met, who went in there and beat up Jesus at that time. Was it JQ? I'm laughing, but it might have been JQ. Does JQ seem like the type of motherfucker that beat up Jesus? Anyway, I also liked how when Jay said he loves everybody, that of course echoed what I said after the reveal when at the start of episode 4, when I said how the reveal of him being Jesus recontextualized how I looked at everything that preceded it. And so then when he said, I love you in that episode, my reaction was, you Jesus, you love everybody, motherfucker. So I liked him saying that in this episode. But let's move on, because there's a lot of really cool fucking things we did talk about in this episode. So this episode explains the end of the last episode and also gives us some information on our bearded island dweller friend, Arthur Schrodinger, with his cat, Schrodinger's cat, who we find out is named Apollo. Side note here, I loved how he clearly loves cats and tried to downplay it. They're really leaning into the Schrodinger's cat thing, but I think there's a little bit more to be said about that I'm going to talk about toward the end of the video. So after Simone leaves Jay in the restaurant, we later see that she's actually on a boat headed to the island that Arthur is stranded on. And they're going there because they saw his shoes in the video, and when his cat Apollo crossed behind Clara in the video, they were able to zoom in on his tag and see Arthur's name on there. Now, as the show often does, it immediately raised the question with me, wait, last time I saw him, he was rescued. Is this taking place before then, or did he go back to the island afterward? And I love how, well, let me just keep moving. We later find out that he went back, and of course I'll get to talking about why, but I love how the show silently raises questions it then answers, or as we see in this episode, it will have characters ask the questions that the audience should or would be asking otherwise. And I like the fact that anytime something comes up that normally I'm looking at as somebody who's going to get on camera and talk about an episode of television, if I see something that's weird, I'm like, hey, what's that? That doesn't make sense. And I like how I now feel comfortable in the idea that if I see something that I'm like, what is that? Hey, what is that? Doesn't make sense. We just saw that. They're going to explain it, because everything that feels inconsequential and small, that feels like it might be a little bit of a plot hole, where, like I said, I'm just like, hey, are they going to explain why he's on the island still? I should have never questioned it. So then it does this wild and crazy thing where not only does it answer the question, but it usually answers the question in the same episode or the next one. So that's what I love about the how they answer questions on this show. And I'm perfectly fine with creating new mysteries each week as long as you're consistently answering the previous ones and not piling on, which actually kind of feels like a lesson that Damon Lindelof might have learned from The Leftovers, because I don't think he listens to me, but my primary complaint about season 1 of The Leftovers is I felt like they piled on too many mysteries before they started giving some answers. And it kind of turned me off, because I think I got to I don't know, episode 6 or something, and I'm just like, yo, can y'all start answering questions now? Eventually they did, and it paid off, but I like this kind of almost 180 where instead of waiting 6 episodes to answer questions, we'll answer some questions for you right away, but then we're just going to give you new ones that are going to make you go, what the fuck, at the end of the episode, and I really like that. So when Simone and Wiley arrive on the island, they ask him about Clara, and he says he can't help them until Wiley refers to Simone as Lizzie out loud. So Arthur then recognizes the name Lizzie and he knows both of their full names. He then says he could tell them about Clara, but they must understand that it comes with a warning and consequences, which is the kind of threat/warning that really suits the tone of this show. Of course, they agree, which also suits the tone of this show. And we begin our journey explaining Clara and the commercial from the last episode. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to mostly zip through explaining what we learned so I can get to talking about more of what I thought about this, what this episode did well. That didn't come off right. So that I can then talk about what this episode did well. Yeah, that feels better. Yeah, I just felt like that'd be a way to kind of keep this as short as possible. I already know, talking about this show, I'm probably looking at 20, 25 minutes, but, you know, it seems like the best idea to kind of not zip through. Well, I'm going to zip through by my standards, but I've already been ranting. I mean, I've already been wasting time, so I'm just going to get started. So we start in 1982, a great year. It's the year I was born. And Claire is visiting her mother as a banker, and we know her mother as Matilda. They say, like, the headmaster at the sisterhood said Matilda, but the captions say Matilde with an E. I'm going to call her Matilde. Claire is told not to go behind the door, but when everyone leaves, she goes in and she discovers this book. And while she's looking at the book, Matilde comes back and catches her. And now that she's seen the book, she has to task Clara with joining the sisterhood, which is called the Sisters of the Coin, even though she thinks that Clara will not be good at this job. And I loved in this scene how when Matilde says she's going to have to kill Clara, they like smash cut to Wiley and Simone screaming in horror along with me. I was like, hey, wait, what? I think Wiley even says like that escalated quickly, which is one of my favorite phrases. Anywho, the Sisters of the Coin are a group of women who pretend to work at financial institutions so they can protect the asset, which is what we have been calling the Holy Grail this whole time. There's also something called the Articles of Care that they created to help teach how to take care of the Grail, which include keeping it moving, because if it's still, it emits some terrible stench. And then the main rule is that you never drink from it, never sip from it. So the Articles of Care explain why. Hold on. Yeah. So the Articles of Care explain a few things. They explain why Clara was holding the Grail like a baby in the video that we saw at the end of episode 4. They care for it like it's a baby and consider themselves its mother. This also explains the reason for the fake pregnancy belly at the ceremony that we saw as well in the Excalibur episode. Then we jump forward in time, and Matilda is explaining to the sisterhood that one of the Articles of Care states that the Grail must be viewed by 1% of the population each year, which means that 75 million people need to view it yearly. She proposes, that rather than moving it all around the world, they get 75 eyes on it at one time. And she proposed they do that by filming a Super Bowl commercial, which now explains the commercial portion of the video. Good moment during this scene is when she talks about how British Knights are going to be like popular and they're going to like last forever, or what, they're going to be around forever, which obviously they were not. I don't know when was the last time I saw British Knights. Like, I saw them, I feel, very early in my childhood. Like, I feel like British Knights might not have even made it to the 90s. But she was essentially describing Nike. But I just thought that was a nice little moment. There's another great moment here where we see Matilda start to explain what happens in the commercial. And then Simone, on behalf of the audience and me, interrupts like, yeah, we already saw the commercial in the last episode. We can skip this part. And I loved how she was speaking on behalf of the audience. And it right at that moment too, because like when they started doing it, my thought was like, well, I've already seen this part. We don't have to go through the whole part I've already seen. And just as I had that thought, Simone interrupts. Perfect. So moving on, we also learn a bit more about the sisterhood's culture and how the men are subservient in this culture, and that's why they're wearing aprons, like the apron men, the old man at the Excalibur battle. And then we see Hans Ziegler, aka Jack and Hagar. He's one of their apron men, and he's wearing one in this scene that happens at the I don't know, like the main hall of the sisterhood chamber. I don't know, but we learned that Hans Ziegler, aka Jack and Hagar, was sent by them to the Vatican to become a priest so he could embezzle the money necessary to fund the commercial and find a location to shoot it. Matilda says that she chose the Vatican because they don't let women be priests, which ties into the baker's reason for hating the Pope. And I wonder if that's their way of telling me that either these two women are connected in some way, or if it's just hammering home the show's thoughts about women in religion. So like we got a female cult, the sisterhood, and even though it wasn't real, the men in the commercial assumed that men would be the Knights Templar and not the women, and that's why they got all fucked up. And I wonder if the show is trying to say something about like misogyny or patriarchy or just like male-dominated society. If they're trying to say something about that, I feel like they probably are. But I'm gonna let them continue to do what they're doing. Matilda has herself starring in the ad, but the sisterhood says she's too old for that shit, like Danny Glover, and so Clara volunteers to do it herself. Hans has now grown resentful of how Matilda treats him and Clara, so he kind of like plays up that resentment with her, and then he tells her that he had a decoy made of the Grail, and he proposes to Clara that they swap his decoy for the real one, destroy the real one, and then this will free Matilda of the burden of caring for the Grail, and then she can give them the attention that they need, because it's like he's a baby, and he's jealous of the bowl that, that Matilda is treating like a baby. And I think that's... I don't know. I feel like that's interesting, especially given, like, I think the last episode title mentioned something about a baby's wings, and I said, like, okay, so we know I can't remember the whole title, but we like it says something like an adult with wings and a helmet or something like that, in which we could say, okay, that's obviously Wiley, but I'm like, who is the baby with wings? And it's not to say this is the baby with wings, but I think it's interesting that in this moment we could tie in Hans. I wonder if Hans has wings. We could tie in, well, why would he have wings? Why would he work with Miss Davis? But we could tie in the him acting like a baby and maybe that baby in the title. But I know I'm reaching, so fuck off me. Anyway, she refuses to do the deal with swapping out the decoy for the real one. But after a contentious shoot with Matilda where she berates Clara and then tells her that she's dying, Matilda does swap out the real Grail for the decoy during the filming of the scene where she's running across the water. Now, real quick about this scene, they would have gotten me with the reveal of Matilda lying about dying to get Clara to react in the scene the way that she wanted to, if it didn't just happen in the most recent episode of Barry. Like, it just happened on Barry. So as soon as that happened, I was like, she's lying about that to get her to perform in the scene. And then ironically, at the end of the episode, she cuts the line from the scene. It was like, yeah, I didn't believe it. Like, oh, fuck, Matilda's a bitch. But yeah, Barry got me with it on Sunday. Not gonna lie. Completely fooled when Sally did it on Barry. But you're not gonna get me with it on Sunday and then get me again with it on Thursday. So nah, you didn't get me this time. I saw that one coming, but I love the coincidence though. So Wiley then asked another question on behalf of the audience. Well, how come no one has seen the commercial? And then we learn it kind of like a hilarious scene that Matilda never actually got authorization to make the commercial, and that the people from British Knights hadn't even met her before that day where she played it for them, and they told her that they were gonna pass on the commercial even though it was free. And so after 3 years of wasted time, $18 million down the drain, they have no commercial to play, and now they have to triple their efforts to get the Grail in front of all of the eyes that it needs to be in front of. So, Matilda's told by the head of the sisterhood to basically pretend like this never happened, and if anyone saw the commercial, she'd be banished, and she also has to destroy all the shoes. And it doesn't sound like a funny scene when you say it that way, but I promise that it was a funny scene at the time. It was also something about the way the main British Knights guy, the black guy, was looking at the commercial, because it had big not hip hop music, but like something that felt kind of close to hip hop music. I don't know. It felt very like nuns doing black shit, and the one black guy that's there is like I'm telling you, it was a funny scene. Anyway, I also liked when Wiley asks. When Wiley asks, how come no one saw the commercial, Arthur kind of like low-key shames them for constantly interrupting, because he says, I'm like, don't you want to hear? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, he's giving them shit for interrupting. I thought that was funny too. So Clara tries to resign from the sisterhood, but Matilda fires her instead and tells her never to return, and Clara vows it will be done and leaves with the actual Grail. Wiley again asks the question of how Arthur factors into this. Well, I can't say he again asked it because he didn't answer before. He again asks a question, which is, how does Arthur factor into all this? And we learned that Clara went to the college that Arthur worked at to get him to help her destroy the Grail because, one, he is in possession of something called a Hercules laser, and two, he is her father. And Wiley say, I knew it! Again, I thought that was a really funny line too. The laser predictably does nothing to the Grail, so Arthur agrees to help his daughter destroy it, and they travel the world for 10 years trying to destroy it and ultimately fail. Their last attempt is to break the main article of care by sipping from the bowl. Clara sips from it and initially nothing happens, but her nose bleeds, and then Arthur says that she kind of looked like she entered into this space of peace and tranquility and happiness, and that's when we come to understand that this was the moment that Clara first met Jay, and that is also the time that the Pope first came in there, and Jay told him to wait because he was talking to Clara in a very pivotal moment where he was likely explaining to her that she was about to take a pretty big L when she went back, but whatever it takes, baby, we got to destroy this motherfucker. And I loved that reveal, and I also love the fact that the dominoes here, right? Clara sips from the bowl, nose bleeds. She goes to see Jay. Jay is talking to her, having a conversation. Again, likely you're about to take this L. He's about to take one for the team. Pope comes in. He hushes the Pope because he's talking to Clara about how probably about how her head's about to explode. Pope gets an attitude, decides he doesn't like Jay, which pushes him to move toward Miss Davis. Miss Davis then tasks him with finding the video, and then he finds the video. The video ends up, taken. He ends up in prison. And it's all the dominoes, right? And we're filling in the backstory, just like I said at the beginning. And I'm really enjoying this ride. And it really just seems like Miss Davis and religion have it out for one another. And it does seem pretty clear that probably the biggest theme of this show is going to be science versus religion. And I don't know where this show is going to fall on it just yet, but I'm enjoying how they're getting me there in this very kind of like fantastical kind of sort of way. So Clara returns from her trip to the restaurant, and like I said, she said whatever it takes. Her head explodes. Me, Wiley, and Simone all jump out of our seats in astonishment. But like I said, the whatever it takes is telling. Like I said, it was probably Jay. Jay probably talked to her in that moment. Made her fall in love, because it's like when Clara met with Jay, he told her this was a necessary occurrence for the greater good, and because he's Jesus, she was all enamored with him and willingly accepted that in order to destroy the Grail, she'd have to have an exploded head. That's what I think happened. And when you're having that kind of conversation, Pope gotta wait. Anyway, so we learned that after Clara got all exploded as shit, Arthur donated her liver, since it's the organ that filters toxins the best. And guess who ended up with that liver? Bad liver Wiley and pierced liver Lizzie. And now, as if everything I already said wasn't wild enough, this is when things get really crazy. Arthur has developed some sort of scientific explanation for all of this. He thinks the Grail has been partially constructed using some sort of toxin, or maybe finished with a toxin, which is why it kills you when you sip from it. He tells a story of how a mouse sipped from it and died, but his cat Apollo ate it and it's cool, fine, all good. So he thinks that one can develop an immunity to the toxins in the Grail just like his cat did. So he thinks that whoever has Clara's liver, aka Wiley and Simone, can sip from the bowl without dying and thus destroy it. All they gotta do is get it out of the well that he put it in. Easy peasy, right? And I can't say, well, he thinks that... I can't say for sure because I don't know where the show is gonna fall on science versus religion if Arthur's theory is correct. I can very clearly see the science versus religion is at play, but I don't know what side they're leaning on, so I don't know if that's going to be accurate. And then lastly, we learn why Arthur is back on the island. So after the whale he gave the Grail to went crazy and destroyed the boat he was on, him and Apollo were stranded on the island. But this allowed him to forget about the Grail, which was a good thing for him because he was obsessed with Wiley and Simone after they got Clara's liver. But once he got rescued, which we saw in episode 1, he realized he wasn't fully over the Grail because in that scene in episode 1, when he was told that he could ask Miss Davis whatever he wanted, he says that he was immediately going to ask about the location of Wiley and Simone, which let him know that he was not past being obsessed over the Grail, so he willingly chose to go back to the island. So I want to close out by talking about a few of the things that I thought this episode did well, the things that I haven't already mentioned as I've been kind of going through this recap. I love how it constantly drew parallels and connections between Clara and Simone, but not super obviously. They called out the one, but they both have shitty mothers. they both have shitty mothers who tell them not to go behind doors. They both don't respect boundaries and then go behind said doors. More importantly, though, shitty mothers. And now they're both literally connected because obviously Simone has Clara's liver, or at least a piece of it. We see like this. It's almost like a Clara highlight reel before Simone says whatever it takes at the end of the episode. And that tells me that Simone sees the connection as well. So I find that pretty interesting, too, to kind of see how this is going to play out and how this is going to influence Simone's actions. This idea of this connection with her and Clara. And then I also wonder if this is going to further connection between her and religion, or if it's going to cause a rift in it. I also loved how they kept having Wiley and Simone interrupt the story with not just their reactions, but my reactions. Like, I thought that was cool. Like I talked about it while I was doing the recap, but like, just feeling like they were saying exactly what I was thinking at the exact time. I love when shows do that. I also liked how they made Arthur appear to be a man of science with no emotional attachments. You know, he downplays his cat thing. He says directly to Clara that not having attachments has gotten him where he is, and that their mission with the Grail is strictly for science. But you don't have that much cat stuff and not care about cats. And by the end of the episode, it becomes clear that at some point, his goal was no longer to destroy the Grail and just to spend time with his daughter. And I thought that was cool, and I thought it was cool how the show handled it. Lastly, I really like how all of these weird storylines intersect and how they connect. And they don't seem like they would. Like I said, the best example here is the thing with Clara meeting Jay and how that connected to the Pope's situation with Jay. That kind of shit. I love how this show is doing that every single episode. It's very Lindelof. Big fan. I'm enjoying the fuck out of this show. It's a really fun time. I'm really excited to see what it has to say about religion versus science. I'm curious to see what kind of ridiculous adventure I'm going to be taking on in each of these next 3 episodes. Having a great time. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you next week for episode 6. And until then, peace.